Hello, I'm Professor John Kelly, and this is Automotive Standards, Laws, and Regulations online at Weber State University. This is week number 5, and here for the next 2 weeks, weeks 5 and 6, we will be discussing the United States Environmental Protection Agency, the laws and regulations that apply to the automotive industry. The EPA, if we come over here and click on environmental topics, you can see there's a large number of topics that they address and that they regulate, but we are only concerned with, in this class, ones related to transportation. So if we go to laws and regulations, click on by topic and then air and then transportation, then we have transportation from mobile sources, and we are going to be exploring here over the next 2 weeks some of these regulations related to the automotive industry. But before that, I always like to go in and look at the history. How did the EPA get started? Why do we have it? There's a link right here. If we go to About EPA and then scroll down to EPA History, it gives us kind of an abridged history of the EPA. And there's several different topics that you can go in and look at related to the history of the EPA. But one of the neat things I want to come back and look at is the milestones, things that have had significant impact since the beginning of the EPA. And if we go clear back to 1962, when a book was published called Silent Spring, that kind of jump starts the environmental movement as far as the entire United States is concerned, followed by a river that caught on fire, and so on. Kind of gives a history of the EPA itself, but it goes back even farther than that. And to really do justice to the topic of clean air regulations and emission regulations, we need to look at what happened in the state of California. The state of California, especially in the Los Angeles area, has had really bad smog problems for a long time. And so if we go to the California Air Resources Board website here, it used to be called C.A.R.B, and now they just call it the California Air Resources Board. If we click on About and then come over here to History, then it gives us a little more information. And as you read through that, it comes down to the bottom here where there's a video called Clearing California Skies. And for your week number 5 assignment, that is the first video that you were to watch. It's about 18 minutes long, and it gives a pretty good history of the air pollution and smog related problems that occurred in California since before World War II, when the automotive industry was growing rapidly and lots of automobiles and industry was out there with no pollution controls at all. Areas that had high concentrations of, or high population and high concentrations of automobiles, like the Los Angeles area, were prone to have this hazy, smoggy, stinky air. And it tells the story of what happened, and there are several questions for you to answer related to that video. So you should have watched that video already before watching this video. So if you have not watched that video, go do it first in the week 5 assignment. and then come back to this video. Okay, so in this video, in our second video here for this assignment, we have, let's go back to the EPA. The EPA, if I scroll clear back to the top here again and go back to the home page, the EPA, as far as automotive related laws and regulations, has governed tailpipe emissions and evaporative emissions. And they have done this since the EPA was formed in 1970, but there were laws and regulations that occurred before that, as you saw in that California emissions video. On our class website, one of the optional books, if we look right here, the required book for this class is the Occupant Protection and Automotive Safety in the United States since 1900. This one here on the left. But the one here in the center was optional, as well as the one on the right. The one in the center is called Cleaner Cars, the History of and Technology of Emission Controls since the 1960s. And you can purchase that book if you would like on the SAE website. It looks like you can get a digital copy for $29.95 if you would like. You can get a print copy for the same price. And that's if you're a member, which you're supposed to be in this automotive program, a member of the SAE, which is a 20% discount anyway. Well, I already have purchased that book. Here it is right here. This is the ebook that I just mentioned. And in this ebook, let me spread this out a little bit here. Let's get in here and look at chapter 1. The California Crusade to Control Emissions. And this pretty much in 4 pages of text tells you kind of what happened in that video, at least the first part of the video on California. So it's got a good summary, but then it goes into details of, or great detail of, all of those topics, what the smog is, how the different boards that were formed to control to try to control the air pollution in California were formed, and what they did, how the automobile companies both resisted, tried to blame other industries for the pollution, and how they eventually worked together to come up with devices to meet the clean air requirements for both California and the United States. So this book, it's $30 as I said, but it has just some fantastic information in it if you're interested in a historical perspective there. If we go clear to the back of the book, there is an appendix that gives a history, kind of a timeline of emission controls and laws here in the United States. And so let's take a look at this timeline. We are not going to look at each individual item, but you can see, starting in 1946, working its way forward all the way through 1999, and I believe this book was published in 1999, so it's a 20-year-old book, so we've got some catching up to do, but gives us when the first emission control laws and devices were required. So, for example, 1961, the PCV valve was required in California by law to begin at a certain model year. And then 1963, it was US law for the rest of the country. There was a Clean Air Act in 1963 for the rest of the country, and it fell under, well, remember the EPA was not formed until 1970, so this fell under the Department of Health, I believe. There was an amended Clean Air Act, California's first year of emission controls, 1966, and then amendments. This inter-industry emission control program started in 1967, and that's where Ford and General Motors and Chrysler and AMC and some other companies got together to pool their resources to come up with ways and devices to meet the air quality requirements for California and the rest of the country. And if you haven't figured it out, usually what happens in California will happen in the rest of the country as far as emission controls, except with several years of delay. So let's move here to the next couple of pages. We've got 1968, where the California Air Resources Board was formed. Federal emissions for light-duty trucks in 1970. First year for emission controls in the United States in 1968. In 1970, the EPA was established, and that brought together 3 or 4 different separate entities in the U.S. government that each were responsible for certain portions of, like, clean air, clean water, food safety, and stuff like that. Now they all fell under the EPA itself. Then there were national ambient air quality standards in 1970 set as well. Leaded gas was removed from gasoline starting in 1972. That led the way to have catalytic converters installed here in 1975. So here's oxidizing catalysts. Well, you can't have lead with a catalytic converter. You can't have lead in the exhaust system because it will poison or coat the catalyst and prevent it from working. Notice the EGR valve was introduced in 1973. Diesel regulations, 1973. An inter-industry emission control program with not just U.S. manufacturers, but import car manufacturers was formed in 1974. In 1975, the first corporate fuel economy standards were established that we still have today, and they did not go into effect until 1978. We had 3-way catalytic converters starting in 1981. The oxidizing catalysts in 1975 were just hydrocarbons and carbon monoxide, but the 3-way cats were to help reduce oxides of nitrogen as well. And then there was a particulate matter standard established in 1986. More revisions to the Clean Air Act, and looks like a formaldehyde standard in 1993. Transitioning in, or phasing in 1994 of the new emission regulations in response to the 1990 Clean Air Act revisions to the 1970 Clean Air Act. And the last thing in this guy's book was the National Low Emission Vehicle Standard established by the EPA. So just kind of a quick history from 1946 through 1999. Now, it's been 20 years or more since that now, and there have been many updates and changes since then. So let's go back to the EPA website here. We were looking at About EPA, history, and then clear down to the bottom here, milestones. So looks like they haven't updated anything since December of 2017 on here. But if we go clear back to, here's 1962, 70, Clean Air Act of 1970 certainly affected the automotive industry. Automotive maintenance programs of 1973. Leaded gasoline phase out. Clean Air Act amendments. Pollution standard for lead, or the lack of lead in fuels. As you can see, there's a whole bunch of other things that have happened over the years. I'm just looking for anything automotive related. Leaded gasoline phase out, 1996. Wow, I didn't know it took that long. EPA completes a 25-year mission to completely remove lead from gasoline. I thought it was gone long before that. New emission standards for cars, 1999. That's for the Tier 2 emission standards that started in 2008. By the way, the Clean Air Act of 1990 started the emission regulations, the OBD2 emission regulations for 1996. Here's clean diesel, where we went to ultra-low sulfur diesel fuel in 2006. Clean Cars program, greenhouse gas, fuel efficiency standards for trucks and buses in 2010. Fuel efficiency and greenhouse gas standards for heavy-duty vehicles. Soot or particulate matter reductions in 2012. Cleaner fuels for Tier 3 standards in 2014 to begin in 2017. And it looks like that's it up through the end of 2017. Okay. The next thing I want to look at is, let's go back to the California Air Resources Board website here for a moment. There was an article that came out in the Automotive News November of 2018. And this is Colorado adopts California Clean Car Standard. So what this tells us is that Colorado has become the 13th state, along with the District of Columbia, to adopt a low-emission vehicle standards based on those of California, increasing the challenge for automakers facing the prospect of a bifurcated, I've never seen that word before. Excuse me, I got to look that up. Divided into two branches. Branched, yeah. So, increasing the challenge for automakers facing the prospect of two different car markets in the U.S. Ones that follow California emissions, ones that follow the US emission standards. So 13 states out of 50. So there's 37 states that still are on US emission standards rather than California emission standards. But these 13 states are ones that have conditions like we have here in Utah, where there are geographical formations that trap the air, especially in the winter months. So, for example, it's the 1st of February right now when I'm shooting this screencast video, and we are in some of the worst air pollution months of the year here in Utah. Utah has had quite a problem with bad air pollution forever. So let me show you. Here's a picture. It's several years old, but here's a photograph from up on the side of a mountain here, looking out over the valley. Now, normally you'd be able to see houses and the Great Salt Lake out there and mountains on the other side, but you can't even see the mountains or the lake or anything out there because the smog, this brown haze right here, is so bad. And that's the same type of situation that is going on in California. Now, that photo was taken in 2014. It's just as bad today. And, well, I don't know that it's exactly just as bad. It looks just as bad. I don't know if you actually went and measured if it would actually be worse, but there is a place where you can measure that. So you can get from this Airnow.gov website, you can go to pick your state, and let me just refresh the screen here, and get the current air quality conditions. So Weber State University is here in Ogden, Utah. And right now we have the forecast for today and for tomorrow and the current air quality index. Now the air quality index, as you can see down here, if it's green, that's good. Air quality is considered satisfactory and air pollution poses little or no risk to anyone. But in Ogden, we've got two of the orange or yellow moderates. So moderate says air quality 51 to 100. Air quality is acceptable. However, for some pollutants, there may be a moderate health concern for a very small number of people who are unusually sensitive to air pollution. If we went up over the mountain to a city called Logan, they are here in the orange, which is unhealthy for sensitive groups, 101 to 150. Although the general public is not likely to be affected at this air quality index range, people with lung disease, older adults, and children are at greater risk from exposure to ozone, whereas persons with heart and lung disease, older adults, and children are at greater risk from the presence of the particles in the air. And then there's unhealthy, that doesn't happen very often, but it does. Everyone may begin to experience health effects. Members of sensitive groups may experience more serious health effects. There's very unhealthy. Everyone may experience more serious health effects. And then there's hazardous. Health warnings of emergency conditions. The entire population is more likely to be affected. And then they have this Action Day link right here. So let's click on Action Day. So for Action Days, today's Action Days, action days are for different areas of the country that have high pollution levels. And so I told you that northern Utah here, where the mountains kind of form a bowl and trap the air from moving around, the warm air settles over the cold air, and it traps it in place here in this big bowl in the mountains. And notice that we've got Utah, Utah, California, Utah, 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 California, Utah, Utah. It's if you look at this Airnow website during January and March of just about every year, you're going to see Utah as having very unhealthy air. And for some reason, we have not adopted the California emission regulations, and everybody gripes and groans about it. Every year they're on the news. Everybody's complaining of how terrible the air is and how something needs to be done about it to clean it up. But then come March, everything cleans up and we're good for the rest of the year, and then nobody cares until the next year when it comes back around. So Utah has a big problem with air pollution during the winter months. So let's go back to this PowerPoint that I put together a few years ago for a presentation at a career and technical education conference. And I asked the question, so this was in direct relation to the dirty air, about what can you do wherever you live. You may not live in Utah, or you may not live in Los Angeles, but there are other parts of the country where they have cities with terrible pollution problems as well. And as bad as they are today, they were a lot worse long before the EPA and the emission controls and everything else were implemented back in the 70s and prior to that. So California and the US government and other countries like China are all wanting vehicles that don't have tailpipe emissions or have zero tailpipe emissions, because for every gallon of gasoline that you burn, and 1 gallon of gasoline weighs about 6.3 pounds, not only do you put out hydrocarbons and carbon monoxide and sulfur dioxide and particulate matter, but it also puts out carbon dioxide, which is not poisonous, but it's considered a greenhouse gas, and that is a regulated gas. So every gallon of gasoline that you burn that weighs 6.3 pounds, that exhaust will react with oxygen chemicals in the air and create carbon dioxide that weighs about 20.35 pounds. So 6.3 pounds of gasoline turns into 20.35 pounds of carbon dioxide, which is a greenhouse gas. Now, that is a regulated gas, regulated by the EPA. And so if you are driving a vehicle that gets better fuel economy, you will be putting out less pollutants and less greenhouse gas. So there's several ways. Let me pull up this table right here. There are several different technologies that can clean up different gases that are regulated by the EPA. So currently the EPA regulates volatile organic compounds, VOCs, oxides of nitrogen, which is NOx, particulate matter 2.5 and 10, sulfur dioxide, carbon monoxide, and greenhouse gases, including carbon dioxide. So here are 4 different technologies. We have a battery electric vehicle here in the first column, and the amount of reduction versus a new gasoline vehicle in 2013 that got 28 miles to gallon on average. So notice for a battery electric vehicle, for almost every one of these in 2013, there was a very high percentage, 99, 76, 49, 64, 95, and 99% reduction in all of those, except notice greenhouse gases were only reduced by 1.8% versus gasoline. And that's because you're using electricity to charge the battery electric vehicle. And so you've got the argument of the long tailpipe, the power generation station, the power source might be putting out greenhouse gases depending on whether it burns coal or natural gas or whatever. It may actually be hydroelectric or wind or solar or whatever. But it's slowly cleaning itself up, and as the electricity production in the country cleans itself up, this savings will increase a little bit. But you got to keep in mind that gasoline doesn't just arrive at the gas station, or doesn't just appear at a gas station. It has to be refined, and it comes from crude oil. You got to search for it and drill it and pump it out and refine it and pump it again, and all of that involves electricity as well. So it may or may not have much of an impact there. Here's a plug-in hybrid electric vehicle with a 10-mile range. So that's like the first generation Toyota Prius plug-in. The second generation, when the Prime that came out in 2017, has, I think, a 26-mile range. So the plug-in hybrid electric vehicle, PHEV, and then the 10 is a 10-mile range. Since it had higher greenhouse gas reductions versus battery electric, because we weren't using electricity to charge the battery, but notice it didn't have anywhere near as high of reductions in the other ones. Here's a plug-in hybrid electric vehicle, the Chevrolet Volt, the second or the late first generation ones with a 40-mile range and its reductions. And then here's natural gas with its reductions as well. And now we have some hydrogen vehicles, and they're going to have a terrible greenhouse gas score as well, because it takes electricity to extract the hydrogen, it takes electricity to compress it to 10,000 psi, and so on. Okay, so those are the regulated emissions by the EPA, and a battery electric vehicle, you'll notice if you look at all of these numbers here, does a very good job of massive reductions in almost every one of those. And the only big difference here is the greenhouse gas. But for places like Los Angeles and for here in the Wasatch Front, northern Utah, the Salt Lake Valley, and around areas where we have these geographical formations and the inversions that go on that trap the air pollution in here, if that electricity is not generated in the same area, then the pollution from that power generation doesn't affect our pollution levels, and we will not be out of attainment for the areas, and you can get in trouble with the EPA for having too high of pollution levels. And so if the pollution is generated somewhere else where they're nowhere near being in trouble of having too high of pollution levels, like out in the middle of the desert, then that electricity and the battery electric vehicles and the plug-in hybrid vehicles here in these inversion areas, these vehicles are pretty much a zero emission tailpipe vehicle. So there's advantages to those. Now you might argue, well, they're still putting out pollution at the power plant. Well, yes, it is, but that power plant is not here emitting its pollution and co contributing to the same trapped bunch of pollution because of the inversion in our areas. So I know that's kind of a lame argument, but that's the reality of how it works. It's the pollution is somewhere else. Okay, now let's go back. Hybrid and electric vehicles, can they promote a cleaner environment? Can they promote energy independence? The United States wants to be independent for their energy production and not have to buy energy from countries and places that don't like us, that want to have nothing to do with us, or even worse, to harm us. And so if we can get rid of that would be great. We want to meet fuel economy regulations and emission regulations and motor vehicle safety standards, and everybody wants it at a low cost as well. Well, we're asking a lot of things for a low cost, which is very hard to do. As I'm sure you've noticed, the price of electric vehicles is pretty high compared to just some little Econobox gasoline powered passenger car, which those are going away as well. I think in 2018 there were around 18 million vehicles sold here in the United States, and I believe it was around 53 to 56%, I can't remember the exact number, of those were trucks and SUVs that got around 22 miles to the gallon, versus smaller passenger cars that could do twice that. And so it's harder to meet these regulations when nobody wants to buy those particular vehicles. Let's go to some problems that we can have here. So energy independence does not necessarily mean that you're going to have clean air and water as the result of that independence. And energy independence is a big goal of the government here in the United States. So if we have energy independence, we'll have less wars, but clean air is not a high priority when energy independence is your high priority. Those two don't necessarily go together. The good part is we're not relying on imported oil or imported energy. If we're energy independent, we can use alternate fuels, but as you may have learned, alternate fuel use does not necessarily mean better fuel economy or cleaner air. Some alternate fuels are absolutely terrible. The only thing good about them is they're alternate. They don't rely on imported oil directly to run the vehicle, but they do rely on imported oil, a lot of them do, to produce the alternate fuel itself. So it's kind of a silly thing. Okay, so what can you personally do to help fight the smog and pollution problems? Because we can't just legislate everything away. We can't just pass laws and have we can't just pass laws and magically have this air pollution just disappear. As much as people would like to believe that you can just pass a law and have that happen, it just doesn't happen. It's going to take all of us doing our part and following the laws to get rid of this pollution or reduce it. So one of the things you can do is if we go to, let's go to fueleconomy.gov. If we go to the fueleconomy.gov website, you can pick some cars to look at. And I guess what I'm saying is, the next time you buy a vehicle, if you want to personally help clean up the air and the environment, you need to pick a vehicle that is cleaner than the one that you currently have. So find a car that's cleaner. Well, how do you find a car that's cleaner? Well, you can come to Find a Car and you can do a compare side by side. So just for the heck of it, let's take a look at well, let's pick a 2018 Ford F-150 four-wheel drive with a 2.7 liter. Then we'll do a 2018 Ford F-150 with a four-wheel drive 3.5 liter. And then we'll do a 2018 Ford F-150 four-wheel drive with a 5-liter engine. The FFV, by the way, is flexible fuel vehicle. And let's look at that one also. 2018 Ford F-150 flexible fuel vehicle. And then we'll just take compare. Okay, so the little 2.7 liter V6, 21 miles to the gallon is combined versus 18 for the 3.5 liter, 17 for the 5 liter, and 17 for the 5 liter flexible fuel. Notice if you run on flexible fuel, you're only getting 13 miles to the gallon, the E85 fuel. And then there are actual mile per gallon feedback from owners and how much you'll spend on fuel, annual fuel cost, cost to drive, and so on. We have these 4 different vehicles that we can look at for fuel economy. But when you buy a vehicle, you shouldn't just look at the cost of the vehicle and what fuel economy it gets. There's an energy and environment tab right up here. So let's click on that, and it tells us that the annual petroleum consumption, how many barrels of regular gasoline, on regular gasoline, how many barrels of crude oil it would take. So we've got U.S. barrels that have the red and white, or red and blue stripes, imported barrels in the dark gray there. So 15.7 for the 2.7 liter, clear up to 19.4 for the 5 liter. Notice we have an additional 5.8 on, well, no, it's not additional. They're claiming 5.8 on E85 because you're running 85% ethanol, but they're not including the energy it took to produce that ethanol in that. So then we have the grams per mile of greenhouse gas, and and a score. So for this score from 1 to 10, the higher numbers are better. So we've got a 4 over here and some 3s over there. That's not very good. And the number of grams per mile. And then if you look at the EPA smog rating, you'll have to pick your state. Let me find Utah here. And here's the smog rating, scale of 1 to 10. The higher numbers being less smog. So here's a federal Tier 3 bin 70 emission regulation that this 2.7 liter engine meets. And notice we've got a bin 70 and then bin 125s over here. That is the, let's see, the 70, the higher that number, the worse the pollution levels. And then we've got the engine family right here, the 2.7 in the middle, the 3.5, and the 5 liter, and so on. So look at, when you go to buy a vehicle, try to find one that gets better fuel economy, because you'll automatically be putting out less carbon dioxide, the greenhouse gas. And then you've got your smog levels there also for the other regulated gases, because it's not just carbon dioxide that is a problem. We still have all those other gases as well. Now let's go back to the EPA website, and let's go to laws and regulations by topic. And then we'll pick transportation, and then we're going to look at cars and light trucks to begin with. All right, passenger vehicles, light duty. So that includes passenger cars and light duty trucks. Light duty trucks are considered to be half-ton, three-quarter-ton, and one-ton trucks, the class 1 through 3 trucks. Now, commercial trucks and buses, heavy duty, are considered the class 4 through 8 trucks, the medium-duty trucks and semi-trucks that you see driving down the roads. So if you have an F-350, you've got a light-duty truck, even though it might say heavy-duty on the side. All right, so we have regulations for greenhouse gas emissions, and for you have to do a report on the EPA an EPA regulation. Here's where you can come and take a look at the greenhouse gas regulations. There's a phase 1 and a phase 2. Remember, a final rule is the actual law, and then we have proposals that aren't actual laws. If I was looking for information to do a report, I would be looking for a fact sheet. A fact sheet right here. Or a summary, because some of these articles or laws can be hundreds, if not thousands of pages long. So let's see. List of regulations. Looks like there's only 5 of them here. We've got the final rule for 2012 through 2016 light duty truck, and then the final rule for 2017 and later light duty truck. Then we have a proposed rule for amendments. So remember, a proposed rule is just that. It's proposed. It's not a final rule. So all of this is on greenhouse gas. If we go back one, here's regulations for smog, soot, and other air pollutions from passenger cars and light trucks. So here is our Tier 3 final rule, our Tier 3 emission standards that went into effect in January of 2017. And lots of others. I think I saw a Tier 2 down here. Right here. Tier 2 in the year 2000 that went into effect in 2008. So these are the actual final rules and amendments. So the laws and their amendments are related to emissions. So we have standards for exhaust and evaporative emissions. The problem with finding information on the EPA website is there's just so much information there. And so most of these, like if we click on this final rule for that's the amendment. Let's go back. Let's go to the final rule for the Tier 3. Here's the rule summary. And I would go to this summary and analysis. Look for anything with the word summary in it to try to get your information on what is that regulation or law for? What is it addressing? And it's even just right here. It's giving you some good information. It tells you where these laws are actually, where they actually fit in the Code of Federal Regulations. Notice this is in Title 40 of the Code of Federal Regulations. I can't talk today. If you remember from the OSHA regulations topic that we talked about a few weeks ago, that was Title 39. So here we are in Title 40 for the EPA. So there are two different regulations for light-duty trucks. Or light-duty cars and trucks. Here's the same things for commercial trucks and buses, for greenhouse gas and smog, soot, and other air pollutants, as well as motorcycles. Non-road vehicles. So non-road vehicles are just as it says, a vehicle that doesn't drive on a road. So airplanes and heavy equipment and locomotives and marine vehicles, recreational vehicles and small equipment and tools. They all have regulations. And then information on greenhouse gas as well. Now, if we go up to the top of this page right here in this blue bar, it tells us we've made some changes to EPA.gov. If the information you're looking for is not here, you may be able to find it on the EPA web archive or the January 19, 2017 web snapshot. So if you're looking for something older, you may have to go to the EPA archive to find it, because this every year when I come in here to look at this website, something has changed. They're constantly changing and updating the laws and regulations and what's available on the website and where it is even accessed at. Where do you get to that information? All right. Well, that gives us just kind of a quick summary of the EPA website, the history of the California emissions, the timeline for the federal emissions, and how to access these laws and regulations for cars and light trucks, which is what you need to do for your next report. But then next week we are going to come in and start taking a look at some of these other automotive related regulations, like for shops and safety. And you've got some SP2 certifications. For the OSHA requirement, you had to do the mechanical safety, but for next week, I believe there's a separate assignment to go in and do the pollution prevention SP2 certification. And next week we'll be talking more about pollution prevention, not from automotive tailpipes and evaporative emissions, but from other chemicals and shop environments and stuff like that. So we will deal with that next week. I believe that's it for this week. Yes. So we'll talk again next week.